we okay?
I'm not okay. Are you okay?
Listener, the time has come. This is season 2, episode 21 of Queer Gals Watch the West Wing, covering the episode 18th in Potomac.
I said to Leigh before we got on this call, I don't think I have any tears left to cry. I am a husk.
I can't believe that I'm immediately crying just at the episode title.
It's understandable. We got quite a few messages from listeners before we'd watched this episode being like, just so you know, we know it's coming up and like we're here. and me and Leigh were like, oh my God, what's going to happen? I thought it was going to be like juicy goss. I genuinely was like, oh my God, it's going to be like the Josh and Donna kiss. Oh no. Turns out not that at all. In fact, just pure emotional devastation.
I would like to actually just give a shout out to Daniel, one of our patrons, who the night that we were watching this episode messaged on Patreon to say that if I'm tracking the recording of the podcast correctly, you should be watching season 2, episode 21.
Daniel.
Literally on the day we were watching it.
What was phenomenal is that I watched the episode, I'd say like 45 minutes before Leigh did. And so I text Leigh being like, call me when you've watched it. And I was crying just alone in my flat. And Leigh called me and I was like, oh my God, she's watched it. And I picked up the phone like mid-sob and Lee's like, hi, honey. Just wanted to say this one thing. And I was like, I just like swallowed I was like, no spoilers. Don't spoil it. And then just had to pretend to be absolutely fine whilst on the phone. And I think, Leigh, it's the finest performance of my career so far.
I mean, I love that also you're wearing your Bartlet for President 98 sweatshirt that I got you for your birthday in honor of the occasion.
Yeah. The world feels a safer place when I wear it.
So I think I thought I'd been spoiled, but I didn't understand the spoiler because I saw on Pinterest when I've been like looking at stills from the show, I saw a photo of some of the cast as like pallbearers carrying a coffin. And I presumed, at some point, Leo must die. I don't know why.
I love that you chose him as the one to die. That's like, I kind of, yeah.
In my head, I was
though.
like, oh, it must be like late season thing that happens. I did not foresee
what happens.
And we were talking about like, who's not going to make it through to the next season because we have to lose someone.
Not even a shred of thought about it. Now, Leigh, here we are. We're already reveling in the emotional climax of this episode and we've not yet even started.
Okay, yeah, focus.
Yeah.
Let's focus.
Let's focus up. Let's pretend to enjoy ourselves.
I hate you, Aaron Sorkin. I hate you.
I've got beef with him.
I will say, I did begin the episode by saying, is this our most stressful previously on yet?
Yeah, it's straight. Let's get into the episode recap. Most stressful previously on yet. Like, honestly, not a moment of positivity to be found here. Everyone's on edge. Everyone is overworked and overtired. We are truly, like, in the shadow of the fall's going to kill you. Like, yeah. We're not moving upwards from here. We're just going back down.
Mm-hmm. We are not in the shadow of Two Gunmen, where, as we began the season, we are in the shadow of a political downfall.
Which, again, like, given the world that we currently live in, feels equally...
It's dark.
It's just so like, can good not triumph over evil anymore?
I mean, I was literally listening to Rachel Maddow before we started record on this, and I will say, dear listener, we do have one gift from God at the moment, and that is that Rachel Maddow is back on our screens 5 nights a week for the first 100 days of the Trump administration.
She knows what the public needs, and she's just providing a service at this point. Mm-hmm. Not just to the queer community, but just to the liberal community at large.
Yeah. I will say I really enjoyed opening the episode with just a simple "Eagle is moving."
Yeah. You know, we don't spend enough time with the security staff, and just starting with a line from a day player, "Eagle is moving." Classy, really classy. And just the fact that it's at 1:20 a.m. in the morning, you know, Everyone's still up and in suits. That's crazy to me. I think actually that would be what would get me like, by that point, you're not feeling fresh, are you? You want to be in your comfies.
Yeah, I think if you work in the White House, you must be running on basically pure adrenaline.
Yeah. So Leo is telling Jed that Josh has had this kind of covert meeting with Joey Lucas. And Jed is not happy about it. He's not happy about the concept of polling and Joey's plan to make it kind of like this fictional governor from Michigan, I think. Was it governor or senator?
Just absolutely throwing the governor from Michigan under the bus here.
100%, poor lad. But it was heavy to start with, Bartlet being like so negative, and then Leah being like, you want to start not trusting Josh?
Intense.
And I was like, look, what I don't want is like a closing of the ranks. What I don't want is for us to start losing trust in each other, like, and the secret's to basically destroy the friendships. That's the last thing I want.
A closing of the ranks is a theme we will come back to in our study session later.
Oh, God.
But I do feel that we're playing with a lot of kind of Nixon-based lore and energy in the opening of this episode.
Like going down to the basement to a secret room to have meetings.
And also kind of the list of enemies vibe of it all.
I mean, circling back to season 1 and Josh saying we talk about enemies far more than we used to. Who knew that the enemy was Bartlet himself?
That moment still for me comes out of absolutely nowhere. I still...
Bradley Whitford was like, I will run with this line. So we're going to go to the covert basement meeting. Leigh, there is a code word entry to this meeting.
Yeah, so I'm fascinated. So why is Sagittarius the code word? Is this, in fact, Jed's star sign? Because for me, that reads...
Do you see him as a Sagittarius?
I see him as a Sag.
I know what you mean. What I'm going to say is I have a devastating, truly emotionally devastating piece of lore for this, and I will hold that back for later.
What I will say is I have a personal ban on ever dating a Sagittarius again.
That's the same with me and Tauruses. It's just not going to happen. Unfortunately, there was one that broke the camel's back, and we won't be going back to that star sign. The good news is Joey Lucas is in the secret basement room, and who else is there?
Thank God Kenny is back. I was really concerned for a moment that he'd gone to Mandyland, but I love that that was just a choice for that one individual ep to kind of throw Josh off his game.
Yeah. And then what I loved was Jed being like, hey, anyone know this Kenny guy's last name? And I was like, do you know what? No. Which was funny, a moment of lightness. But then I loved Joey swooping in and being like, Kenny's my guy, you can trust him. In her words, to trust me is to trust him.
I love that.
It was so beautiful. It was like, I don't know, there was just something really gorgeous there about how like he speaks for me and he like, our voice is one voice.
It's a nominee for Girl, I Feel Like a Girl for me for this episode.
I think I can't cry about this.
It's ultimate gal pal energy. Do you know what I mean?
It really is.
Because everyone in my life knows that if they tell me something and they tell me not to tell anybody,
you'll tell me.
That includes you.
Yeah. And likewise.
To tell me is to tell you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. A secret shared is a secret shared with Fioli.
Now, what I will say, the polling numbers are in. And I will say, we did not really get any insight into Jed's state of mind last episode. We had his one kind of slightly feral fight with Abbey, but no true insight into his state of mind.
And it seems like what he wants is to be president again.
Yeah.
And the numbers are bad.
Could not be worse, in fact.
Honestly, possibly the worst place to start from. It's essentially saying that, like, no one's going to trust you. Women over 55 may trust you, but realistically, most liberals will now see you as a liar.
I'm glad that we're being, like, realistic about what a public perception of something like that might be. You know, attitudes towards illness and sickness in 2001 were not what they are now.
And, like, kind of Joey's polling had proven a lot of people didn't understand what the illness was. And I think that kind of like lack of information or knowledge is going to be a huge kind of stumbling block in this campaign. Mm-hmm. Are we going to keep going with the campaign? It all feels very bleak. Are we calling off the re-election? Where the hell are we going with this? Like, I think you put in the shared doc, I think we're going public this episode.
Yeah.
We're definitely gearing up for that.
Yeah, for sure. I think these polling stats, there's no way around it. Like in terms of our kind of Greek story arc,
Yes.
we are definitely in our cave with these polling stats.
Yeah.
But hopefully setting up for Bartlet's inevitable rise back to the nation's hearts.
God, I hope so.
Although when Jed does ask, is there any good news? The no sir from Joey really does feel like a nail in a coffin. And I did have the question, where the hell is this episode going from this cold open?
It seems to be going into more drama because we can't sit in this moment, Leigh, because there's been a military coup in Haiti.
Of course. Because you know what? Whenever there's high stakes, why not throw a military coup into the mix?
So the president-elect in Haiti, like there's just been an election in Haiti, which the US kind of seems to have been quite key in supporting a democratic election there. But the president-elect is missing and the military are like taking control. And we're in the Oval with Leo and Jed, and then just a few guys from, I'm assuming, just the intelligence military teams.
A moment for Jake, who came across as a deeply capable man. And I will say, the minute that Leo McGarry first names anyone, I immediately trust them.
Yeah. Hi, Jake. You're doing a great job. Big day for you. Big day. But the question on our lips, Leigh, is what?
Where is Fitzwallace?
Like, could we just not book him? Was he busy? Like, does anyone listening know why we just haven't seen Fitzwallace for all of season 2?
I want him here for the rollout. I want his opinion on the situation with Jed's health and the rollout to the public.
Because we're referencing him. They're like, hey, can you send these, like, can you pop a call over to Fitz? Can you make sure Fitz has got these numbers? But where is Fitzy?
Fitzy is also one of the original people who knew about Jed's condition.
Yeah, I want his take on what's happening.
Where is his, White House counsel
moment? Because God, I'd love to see that scene.
I would love to see that scene.
Anywho, we conclude this scene by deciding that we're going to evacuate all of the non-essential staff from the US Embassy in Haiti. But back to the basement. Sam Seaborn is here, Leigh.
Never thought I'd say it, but actually, thank God Sam Seaborn is now in the room.
I think the thing that we needed and what Sam provides is that Sam has an ability to just spew out non-stop ideas. And actually, we're kind of at the point of this process where we just need people to like be saying things. And then we can say no to all of those things, but just like, let's just keep the ideas flowing. I'm really glad that he knows, but I'm really sad that we didn't get to see him find out.
Yeah. We need a little cherub in the room, I think, at this point, because he doesn't have the same cynicism that other leading staff members have.
He has a sense of hopefulness as a character.
Yes, and a sense of earnestness, which I think we need in this moment. Yeah, thrilled that you're finally here, Sam.
So what we're discussing here is how are we going to go public and what's the kind of best plan of action. And there's a lot of discussion around it being a TV interview, and like, if it is a TV interview, is it just Bartlet? Is it Bartlet and Abbey? Is it in the White House? Is it on a studio set? What sort of interview is it going to be? Is it going to be a like pre-written statement, or is it going to be question and answer? This is what's all kind of being thrown up by the gang. Toby just leant back in chair, glazed look on his face.
Toby here is leveraging his seniority in such a sexy way. He's truly just effortlessly the most powerful man in this room. Just love him coming in seamlessly with the final plan.
And do you know what we don't often see, because Josh is so like bolshy and like throws his weight around a lot, we don't often see him kind of treating Toby as senior staff, because Toby is more senior to Josh. Josh is the deputy. It was really nice to see, actually.
Also, I will just say the final plan being Dateline. God, I love Dateline. God, I love it.
That's just a thing that doesn't exist in the UK. And I always thought it was like a dating show. So people were like, oh, I'm going to go home and watch Dateline. And I was like, okay, you do you. And then for a while, I thought it was like a like murder TV show, like real true crime.
Which it also is.
Okay. Well, that would be where I got confused. So Sam's question that he poses is, I think, one of the most interesting ones in the room, which is he's like, look, we're talking about how we're going to do this and how we're going to go public. But what we're not talking about is the fact that any self-respecting journalist is going to immediately ask, Jed, are you running for re-election?
And I love the simultaneous head tilt from Josh and Toby at that question.
He makes a good point. You've kind of got to have 3 plans back to back ready before you can go public about his MS diagnosis. And those 3 back-to-back plans of like dealing with the fallout, looking at a kind of campaign situation, and then like looking forward at like what the press is going to be regarding that. You've then got to have all of your spin prepped for like every eventuality, which is a shit ton of work for these people to do by themselves because this whole thing is still secret.
Arguably, the whole communications team, meaning obviously Toby was the first to know of the rest of the staff, but arguably CJ and Sam should both have immediately been told first, even over Josh, because they're the ones that will need time to prep a communication strategy.
Exactly. The workload, like the theoretical workload, is so overwhelming. I can't even think about it because it makes me feel physically sick.
Just a lighter moment though, this whole basement room, the whole idea of this basement room is crazy. And I really got quite a thrill out of living for the goss, being a fly on the wall for the goss. I love being in on the goss.
Yeah, just like the secret meetings of it all.
Yeah.
Shall we have a moment of lightness that is a tonic for the soul?
Please.
From Charlie and Dolores. I have 2 ears. How many speakers do I need?
At least 6 in a double subwoofer.
I'm not getting a subwoofer. The fact that we've created a scenario in which Dolores Landingham is talking about subwoofers, to me, is beautiful television writing.
Yeah, also a moment for her gorgeous navy skirt suit. Hair is pristine as always.
And I did want to note that Dolores is a lover of a brooch.
She loves a brooch, much like many women of her generation.
There's something fucking classy about, like, I've put together this outfit and then I've, like, corresponded a brooch to the outfit.
Weirdly, this is also something we're going to come back to in the study session.
Oh my God. Okay. So the news is that Mrs. Landingham is buying a car.
Yes.
And therefore, all the men in the White House must have an opinion about it.
Yes, and I did love, why do men think a woman can't buy a car without a man? An excellent question. But also, this is my new Roman Empire. Why is Dolores buying a car alone? Is there no husband? Let this be the insight into Dolores's personal life of our dreams. Is she widowed? To your question,
I think so. When they were talking about her sons, it wasn't kind of clear. But then when she did her Christmas monologue, if you'll remember, she talked about her husband, like me and my husband. We always felt like this way. Mm-hmm. So I think there was a husband. I think she's widowed. She does mention later on, like, oh, so-and-so would always go to a particular dealership and like cut a deal. And that feels to me like husband behavior.
Agreed.
But the fact that he's not doing it makes me feel like he's no longer around, which makes the bond between her and Jed like closer. Because I think he's been like, she could have retired when that happened, you know, but she's a working gal. She's always been a working gal.
Why would you
Leigh.
make me cry again?
I'm not doing this on purpose. This is Aaron Sorkin's fault, okay?
But imagine having a husband and a family and a whole family life and then all of them dying and being like the last one standing.
It's tragic as fuck. It's heavy. These are the things that women have to deal with, Leigh.
Oh, we've come to these women.
I just can't get enough of these women. Also, speaking of, there is in fact a response to Mrs. Landingham from Josh and Charlie where they simultaneously look at each other, shrug and go, women.
Crazy.
And I will say that I have a lot of respect for Mrs. Landingham's response to this, which is just to stare at Josh and go, what do you want? A valid question, Dolores.
But I couldn't feel Dolores more deeply. I mean, so in buying my home where I live, because I was a young, impressionable woman. So many people tried to absolutely take me for a ride. I also had someone out to service my washing machine recently, and they asked me, I was like trying to sort the guy's parking, and he was trying to explain something to me at the same time while I was sorting his parking. And then he goes, oh, well, maybe I could speak to your husband, because he thought I wasn't fully following. And I was like, oh, well, she is just upstairs. Let me grab her for you.
People are assholes. Also, like, I've paid you for a service, sir. Why don't you just hold on a damn second and let me sort out your parking for you, which fundamentally you should be able to organise yourself. Let's go and see Leo.
Yes.
And in order to see Leo, we must talk about Margaret.
Why is she costumed in this episode like she's 50 years old?
She's costumed like she's in Mad Men.
Yeah.
She's wearing like a kind of faux Chanel suit. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
Like the like Chanel two-piece kind of waffle style suit.
It's just, there's something about the collar of it that's so like frilly and fussy. And I'm like, she is 30 years younger than this.
She's, at this point, that actress is younger than us.
Yeah, she's still in her 20s.
Like, oh, come on now. Put her in a black slip dress. Let the woman wear a slingback heel, for the love of God.
When they get it so right, I feel so much of the time. It's just like, I do feel like sometimes they age Margaret with the costuming, because she's a stunning woman.
Well, do you think this is part of the problem? Do you think they accidentally cast like an absolute baddie in this role?
Yeah.
And like sent her into costume and were like, there's no way we can put her on screen in this. Look at her. She looks fucking amazing. Just wearing the shit out of like everything that like Bonnie and Ginger and like Donna, like like we can't put her in this shift dress. She's like a supermodel. That's my read on it. And then they were like, I think some of Mrs. Landingham's things can work. Okay, so what Leo and Josh are talking about is we're going back to Big Tobacco. Now, it's not that I don't care about this storyline, especially because it's kind of like tying in stuff that we learned about last season with PACs and like funding different campaigns and how that can like sway legislators to be like not looking at certain things because they've received money from certain industries. I find that really interesting. It really is interesting. I'm just so stressed. I cannot have any distractions right now.
I don't want any B plots this week. I don't want any B plots.
Speaking of B plots, we're back to Haiti. So the Haiti update is that the president-elect is currently in the boot of a car of what I believe to be maybe like an American journalist trying to seek asylum in the US embassy because the military are like essentially saying he's a criminal and want to hold him to trial, which, as they discuss in the scene, they do not think would be like a correctly handled piece of law-abiding stuff.
Arguably, I think any president being in any boot of any car is kind of the most stressful a situation could ever possibly be.
Yes. So Jed is basically like, what am I going to do? And your boys from earlier are all back in the Oval, Jake and your other lads and Leo. And they're like, look, if you let him in, you're essentially making a stand. Like you're embroiling yourself in this big time.
You're taking a side.
And Jed, as we know, is a lover, not a fighter. So he's just like so desperate for no one to get hurt, which is obviously incredibly cute, but kind of impossible when you're president of the United States. So he is like, yes, let's go ahead. Let's let him seek asylum in the US Embassy. Get some fucking Marines down there. Like, let's do this thing. But again, no time to reflect because we've got to go back to the basement.
Oh, and I understand tensions are high, but let's not eat each other alive, Sam and CJ. Please.
Yeah. So what seems to be happening here is that Sam and CJ have become caught in a cycle of spin.
Yeah.
Which is, it's such good writing. It's such good writing because they're basically each saying an idea and then spinning that idea all the way one way and all the way the other. And it's just relentless. And obviously neither of them now know where they stand on anything.
Ultimately, there is no good way of spinning this.
No.
I think is what we're getting at here.
There is no positive outcome of this. What a day for CJ to be like, I'm having to come down and do these secret meetings, but also there is like a coup happening in Haiti And also, like, all of these questions are being raised about this big tobacco lawsuit.
Yeah, ultimately, like Toby, Josh, and Sam can be almost 100% focused on the Jed issue and grumble, and, you know, give their entire emotionality to this problem all day. Yeah. Whereas CJ has to go and do a press briefing and pretend it's not happening.
Exactly, which I think is more emotional labor. So she's like, sorry, I've just got to pop out. There's a coup happening in Haiti, leaving Toby and Sam together.
Toby was drumming his fingers and I was like, what's he thinking? What's he saying?
I know.
And I already knew it was going to be an emotional Toby and Sam scene before it had even begun.
Yeah. And the thing that you wrote in the shared doc about this, and like I hadn't even thought about this and it kind of like floored me. You said this has all the notes of the Biden dropout and I'm not emotionally ready to face that truth.
It almost felt like a little window into a very secret private conversation between like two top Biden aides.
Yeah. And I think for me, I hadn't really kind of put any thought into like, because I didn't understand like what the process would have been. I was like, oh my God, it just seemed like they must have all chatted about it and then put out a press release. But actually you're like, oh, cool. So like in the weeks leading up to that press release, let's probably say 95% of the White House didn't know it was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And suddenly it's like, were there basement meetings?
My instinct is, yeah.
And then all these people who we know from the Biden administration, suddenly you're like, in the kind of context of their Carols and their Bonnies and their Gingers, none of those people would have known who were like trying to schedule their days and they're like scurrying off. It's so stressful.
Because if you recall, during that period as well, Biden had COVID.
Yes. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't go there.
Yeah.
I can't go there. We're going back to tobacco, and I'm going to try and get through this as quickly as I can because I don't have time and emotional energy for this, even though it's really interesting. So Josh is off to find out who's holding up the money that the government lawyers need. So basically there's like particular committees that can release money, but they're like not releasing the money. They're not like passing it through. So Josh needs to speak to an insane man. And they're just like on the steps outside, like somewhere in DC. And can we talk about Josh's costuming here very briefly?
Now, I will say, I think we saw a window into this in season 1. What I am now going to coin Josh's back on his Men in Black shit.
Yeah.
Where he's just like, he's got his shades on. He's got his little beeper on his belt. Yeah. And he is ready to do business.
In a black suit.
We never see him in black. It's so striking.
He has no right to look so good at a time like this, is all I'm saying.
No. And you know what? I'm glad that Josh has this. I think while he's in such emotional turmoil over everything else, I think he needs just a righteous cause that he can ride in on and be like the man who's like on the right side of history with it.
For sure. So he's there being like, look, you need to release this money. And this other dude's like, look, it's more complicated than that. You know, like there are some people that you don't think are holding it back. Like it's not Republicans that are just holding it back. Drama. And then this man says one of the most insane lines of dialogue I've ever heard in my life. Leigh?
Comeback's gonna dance with the girl that brung him.
What? Comeback's gonna dance with the girl that brung him? Men are exhausting, Leigh. Just tell me what you mean.
What in the name of the 1950s is that?
God, and you know what? DC must have been full of this sort of shit back then, in the millennium, with just like the old guard just saying like riddles and parables. I have to move on. Okay, Donna.
Oh God, Donna, not Donna. I can't handle Donna's reaction. I can't do this. Also, she looks amazing in red.
She is wearing an incredible red, like, jersey dress. You know, like it's like quite tight fitting. The body is amazing.
I just think blondes with alabaster skin look amazing in red.
Specifically, and it's something that is coveted when you have pale skin and blonde hair and you can wear red. Hats off to you. Wear red every day.
Yeah.
Because if you can wear red and pull it off, I have a very rosy complexion and I cannot really wear red. Donna looks phenomenal. So Toby has brought Donna into his office to bring her in on the situation that's unfolding.
And he says one of my new favorite lines of dialogue from this show, which is, I'm going to tell you something shocking, except we don't have time to be shocked. So I just need you to hear it and go back to work.
I love Toby when he's like this.
Donna's face breaks me every time. It's like Joshua in the hospital all over again.
Yeah, it's really similar. Now, the thing that I found really gorgeous about this scene is the way that it was shot. So when Toby's speaking to Donna, the camera's like over his shoulder and she's sat in a chair and he's stood.
Mm-hmm.
So like all of the shots of Donna's face, she's like looking up at him. And there's something so, not that I'm like infantilizing a woman, but like there's something so like childlike and young. And like Donna is young.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that we have this, like all of these people have such grown up responsibilities. And it's just this moment of like, there's a vulnerability there. And you could tell the way that it's shot is like, not only is like Donna a young woman and like therefore she's having like a very emotive response to this, but also like she's a junior member of staff. Like,
yeah,
the power imbalance there as well. It's so beautifully like kind of summed up just in the way that it's shot.
We've also not really even seen Donna and Toby interact that much.
No.
And he says she's the first assistant to find out.
Yeah, that's what I find really interesting. So obviously like Carol doesn't know, Bonnie and Ginger, none of the communications EAs know, but also that means that Mrs. Landingham doesn't know, which is what we kind of guessed last week.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. And I know that the literal shivers just thinking about this scene, but I do just find it so moving. I think because Donna often gets these like kind of ditzier moments. She's often kind of the comic relief or the person who has a very innocent reaction to something. She's like last episode, you know, she doesn't understand. And I find it so moving because I think, you know, a lot of young women have the experience of being underestimated. And I love that Donna as a character is given the dignity in this scene of just fucking handling it. Yeah. Just swallowing it. And I think, you know, you're lucky to get through your 20s as a young person without having a moment of like, oh God, like real life is happening now and I just have to be able to handle it. And I think for a lot of young women, because of the way that you are treated by society, you don't expect yourself to be able to handle it when those moments happen. And seeing that moment of like Donna just coming through really moved me.
There's something really gorgeous as well about the choice from the writers to tell someone who's not a senior staff member, because everyone who's heard about it up to now, as soon as they hear the news, obviously they're like, is the president okay? Yeah, he is. They're immediately preoccupied with the business at hand. And so I thought it was really effective to tell someone who doesn't have that same level of skin in the game, because then we get to remember that there's a human at the bottom of this. And like Donna's reaction is just to ask Toby, is the president in a lot of pain or discomfort right now? Which was what I needed, because I feel like we're in the kind of fear of how the public is going to receive this information. It feels like from time to time we're forgetting that 7 years ago, Jed got this like life-changing diagnosis that he and his family have been living with in secret all of this time. And the response from the public is going to change his life.
Yeah.
And so I kind of needed that.
And I love actually that Donna, who I've said before, feels like the real emotional heart of the show. She's the one that has the emotional intelligence. I love that she's the only one that we actually see get told.
Yeah. Would you like some much needed relief from our dynamic duo?
Please.
So obviously Charlie won't let the whole car thing go.
Yeah. He wants to make sure that Mrs. Landingham isn't getting duped.
I love that Dolores was like, well, when I talked to the salesman, I paid sticker price. And Charlie's like, no one pays sticker price. Everyone pays below sticker.
I love this 21-year-old man being like, let me go down there.
Yeah. I'll go down there and I will get you a better deal. But I love that she went to the sales room alone.
Yeah.
With her little handbag.
Yeah.
And then he's talking quite a lot about her having like the towing package. I'm assuming getting like a tow bar installed. And she's like, why would I need a tow bar? And he's like, well, I don't know. I thought we would go camping. And then this leads to this exchange, which is her being like, what would I be doing? And Charlie's just responding, warding off bears, that kind of thing. But I love that Mrs. Landingham said that she couldn't take anything below the advertised price because she's a government employee and therefore she can't like take any like deals.
She can't take any gifts.
Sobbing. Shall we go to the sit room?
Please.
Because it is kicking awfully.
And Nancy is back. Thank God. Love her.
Nancy is very present.
I needed this. I needed her strength.
She comes in and immediately says, you guys need some adult supervision.
Screaming. And that's how I intend to walk into every green room from now on.
Yeah. Oh my God, Leigh, I love that. You guys need some adult supervision? Great. I'll just grab a seat. You know, Leo's got a lot on his plate at the moment. The plate is full, but he is kind of like freaking out right now. And Nancy is just like cool, calm, collected. She takes a phone call. She calls Fitzy. She scrambles some Marines. And Leo's like, the Haitian military have got quite a lot of weaponry, the majority of which has been sold to them by the US, which, you know, happens all too often in situations like this. And I think it's really funny when he's like, and all they've got to protect them at the US Embassy is these Marines. And Nancy may I be Nancy?
Please.
Embassy Marines aren't lawn jockeys. They're not decorative. They're trained in restraint, and they're trained well.
Nancy, if they take the embassy, are we going to know? They're going to send some kind of note?
There's no note, Leo. They're taking the embassy.
Ugh.
Good God, this is insane drama. Like this is like Argo happening right now.
Argo is happening. Argo is happening right now. But also, can we have a moment without the falling of Haiti? Please, a moment. I'm emotionally exhausted. We're only 19 minutes into the episode.
We're literally halfway through. And by this point, like I had to stop to like take on fluids, you know, do some stretches. CJ's doing her thing.
I just love her. She's in her press briefing and one of the White House reporters asks her a question and she just says, "You're not taking me there." The power move from CJ. She is effortless in the face of adversity.
A boundaried queen. Just being like, no, I will not.
But also we now know that Carol does not know, but Carol knows that something's up and she's worried.
Yeah, she's like, kind of like flapping a little bit. She's like, are you all right? CJ's running from this press briefing to a little meeting. And Carol's like kind of bustling along behind her. And CJ's like, do I look all right? And Carol just barefaced looks at her and goes, you look quite tired. And I was like, Carol, please. I know that you made a promise to yourself to be truthful to CJ at all times. But I don't think CJ needed to hear that right now.
She didn't need to hear that right now, no. Who is looking amazing, though, is Bonnie in powder blue. Yet again.
She loves a twin set. Yeah.
And she wears powder blue like Donna wears red. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. And it's this like really quite like light, bright blue, which again, I think is very hard to pull off. But was very in vogue 2001. That kind of like baby blue almost. So we're meeting someone called Mr. Hackett, and he strongly offers handshake to CJ with a hello, Claudia.
Claudia's her straight off the bat. But then the immediate switch to CJ when he realizes that she's like, this is a serious developing situation. That was fascinating for me.
CJ is so fucking classy and powerful and cool in this meeting. So this guy is like a network exec for TV. And she's like, look, this is the deal. We're going to come to you on Wednesday with this big story. You're going to have 30 minutes. You're going to have one interviewer. It's going to be here in the mural room. You're going to share that footage with a bunch of other networks. And you're just going to take that deal. And you're going to go back to the people at the board who you're saying don't want this. And you're going to tell them that they're going to take it. And I was like, wow, actually, like she's a young woman. This guy's in his like late 50s, 60s maybe. And like for her to be so clear and powerful when she is so stressed. is
and
amazing.
that is why she got the job. That is why she is White House press secretary. That
Precisely. Then we have this exchange, which is phenomenal writing.
He goes, CJ, between friends, is the water over your head?
No, the water is exactly at my head. But the thing is like the way that he says it isn't like a journalist like digging for dirt. He says it like he's genuinely worried about what this story might be.
And on the page, he as an actor could have made the choice to have that be a bit of a dig.
Yeah.
And it could have felt kind of gross.
Like, oh, looks like you're struggling.
But the way that he says it makes me think there's a history there. He respects her.
Yeah.
He's having an emotional check-in. And I love that choice.
Me too. That's the smarter and more interesting actor choice, in my opinion. To tobacco once more.
Josh, he's just loving being on his high horse about lying right now. He's just loving it.
Which feels like I understand why he's doing this, but also like we have so far to fall, Josh.
Yeah.
So he's in a meeting with the committee who's essentially holding back the funding for this legal campaign against big tobacco. And he's just like laying into them, being like, you guys need to release the money because we're like the little guys going up against the big guys. And the argument that the congressmen are making is really interesting because they're like, look, you're talking about the fact that like the American public have been misinformed by big tobacco. They've been lied to. But realistically, like they're adults, they can make their own decisions. Like we've known for a long time that like tobacco is not great for you, but people are still smoking. So like what do you want us to do about it? I don't think this is an argument we can win. Like I don't think there's enough here to stand up in court. Such an interesting scene. Such an interesting like moral conversation. Such an interesting thing about big industry controlling government. Again, I'm just so overwhelmed by narrative right now that I have no capacity for this. So let's go back to Abbey Bartlet coming into the secret basement room.
Please.
First of all, there's a tall, blonde woman.
Who's the blonde? You make the excellent point. Her security detail, perhaps?
I think it's her personal Gina Toscano.
Right.
I'm just saying that this is a 6 foot tall, like blonde woman with a deep voice. Obsessed. So she's in the secret basement room with Sam. I just want to discuss, so like Sam, so she's like, what is this room anyway? And he's like, oh, we've done some things in here, blah, 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 blah. Some of the millennium things.
Fascinating. What does this mean?
And I was like, do you mean like the stuff where like everyone was worried about the millennium bug? Like, was it like prep for that? Or like, was this where you planned the millennium party? Like, I'm unclear which end of the spectrum we're on.
It could be anything. I also love that Abby is a power move. Every time she's walking into a stressful meeting, comments on the room that the meeting is happening in, which is a very like comedian move.
I never thought about it like that, but it is so interesting. That's such a tactic, isn't it? Like when someone's like been waiting for you to arrive and they're like, you can tell Sam really wants to get into it. And Abby is so good at that, isn't she? At like distracting people off the bat when they arrive somewhere.
And I will say, but that Sam feels like exactly the right person for Abby to be speaking to right now because he was the one who got the watertight non-liability for the oil tanker.
That is
so
true.
He's good
that
at this.
True. I will just let the record state that both Abby and Jed are unable to not be in control. Like both of them can't handle it, which is fascinating energy as a couple to have. There is a lot of power play here, which is, I think Sam's like, you know, we're in a tight spot. Like, let's be like honest with each other. And Abby being like, don't forget who I am. Abby is just after like last week when she like kind of went off on one with Babish and was like, when did I stop being Dr. Bartlett? She's now like, I am Dr. Bartlett, bitch. To which Sam just had to respond with a, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I really did not know that Sam had it in him to play with Abby, but he really has come to play, and I really appreciate that from him.
I think this scene is so good, yeah. Like, because normally Sam flounders with women, especially women in power. Like, obviously, bar CJ, like it seems to be that often when he's like going toe to toe with these like powerful women, he sort of just like kind of crumbles and like makes a fool out of himself. But this is such a good scene. But we're back on the car, Leigh.
Yes, obsessed with this Charlie and Dolores subplot. It's just gorgeous.
To be a fly on the wall for a day in the office with them, just sparring with one another, like banterously, and then just walking to lunch in the canteen.
But Phoebe never will.
Leigh! We can't go there yet. We have to wait until the end because I can't do it.
Daisy.
Yeah. The problem is that we were evacuating the non-essential workers from the embassy. We'd got to the airport. The plane got boarded by some militia. And then we opened fire on them and killed some of them. But the plane is now in the air. So like an evacuation that's not quite gone to plan.
Again, it's evoking Biden.
Yeah.
But good old Canada helping out.
Good old Canada again, a la Argo, stepping in. So the sort of the situation in the embassy is still not great. There's a lot of shouting happening in the Oval Office. A lot of like Jed being like, I can't lose any men, not after what happened before. With all of was it the DEA? Is that the right?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the DEA agents and the kind of Marines that got lost on the ground there.
The tension fee, I almost cannot handle it. This is a heavy ep.
It's really heavy, but again, you've just got like these big hitting actors going toe to toe. And like, the thing is, so often in drama, when actors shout, they like lose some stakes in a way, or like I don't know, it can be quite an easy emotional place to go to, like yelling. And often there's like a more interesting choice to make. But the thing is, it's just like Martin Sheen is such a phenomenal actor with such gravitas that actually the majority of the time as Jed Bartlet, his character is fighting yelling.
Yes.
So then when it does come through and he actually yells, you're like, it's so earned that like you just can't look away. The decision is made between him and Leo that like, because obviously until now it's just been him, Leo and Toby that have been talking about re-election. And he's like, let's call a meeting tonight. Let's bring the whole gang in on it.
Yeah.
Which is what we need. Now, what Jed also needs is a moment of lightness and to have some fun and pretend that his day is not happening.
Thank God Jed is getting in on the Dolores new car antics.
I would like to mention that as he walks into the kind of reception area where Dolores and Charlie have their desks, he just calls over to Mrs. Landingham by calling her Bob Cratchit.
I did not catch that through all the tension.
It's so funny. And he's like, oh, I don't know why you haven't talked to me about this. And he's like, do you think I would have judged you for like having it as like some sort of extravagance?
Oh.
I know. There's a lot of like, kind of like them joshing and then getting really real with each other. And I love from Mrs. Landingham, she has a strong, I could beat you up any time I want, sir.
Secret Service would have you down like a calf at a rodeo.
Such a male line. Like a calf at a rodeo. All right, Mr. New Hampshire.
Madness. I also do love that Dolores says of her new car, it's a beauty.
That ended me. Truly.
And then also her describing it's got this smell. And Jed goes, it's the smell of freedom. So characteristically intense.
So intense. The thing that I found really cute was that he was like he offered to pay like the difference. Like, like he was like, let me put some money towards it. And then she was like, no, like I've never bought a new car before. Like we've always got secondhand. And I wanted to buy this car for myself outright.
No.
I know. And at this point in the story, listeners, I was like, this is such a gorgeous storyline about like women being in control of their own lives and like doing things for themselves. And like, what an amazing storyline to give Mrs. Landingham. I'm so happy. This is the light relief I needed. Fuck you, Aaron Sorkin. How dare you? Jed finishes the whole thing off by saying, when you pick up the new car this evening, drive it back here, put the car in the driveway, I want to kick the tires.
Oh.
Jed is just so Jed sometimes. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's such a Jedism. I want to kick the tires.
And you know what? Unlike Josh, I can see him like under a car sorting something out.
Yeah. Or like a ride-on lawnmower, like taking it apart, Jed has a ride-on lawnmower in New Hampshire.
He does, yeah.
The visual of that is so funny.
Back to the basement.
Back to the basement. This scene was very enjoyable because, last week we were talking about how like Abby has this different type of intelligence to a lot of the people who are in the West Wing. Like, she is just like essentially one of the most qualified doctors in the United States.
If not the world.
If not the world. Powerhouse. And, you know, then she's like in amongst all these lawyers. And she has just decided that instead of being helpful, she's just going to wear Sam down with like incredibly specific medical speak.
She also, I can't handle, at one point she calls Sam my brother.
Yeah, that was too much for me. My brother.
But then also, her and Sam have this lovely moment of banter where I feel like Sam finally gets in with Stockard. I feel like Stockard has been lukewarm on Sam this whole time. But then Sam really like gets her respect at the end by saying, what a stupid major you had, after she says something particularly intelligent.
Yeah, that's really good. Cue the entrance of Oliver Babish. And this is when it gets fucking darkly.
Abbey is going to lose her career. Oh, dear God, the drama.
As we know, Oliver doesn't take a single grain of shit from anyone.
No.
Not even the First Lady. And
he
like,
takes no prisoners, not even Stockard.
Abbey is like classically on her usual shit, which is that she's like, I'm just not going to accept like any bullshiness from you. And he's like, with respect, I need you to sit down and listen. Like, Mrs. Bartlet, Dr. Bartlet be damned. He's kind of got what I'm assuming is kind of like not the Hippocratic Oath, but like, you know, like the doctor's pledge you make when you become qualified as a doctor, which is basically the rules of engagement of being a doctor. He's kind of cross-examining her and being like, cool, so like this doctor said this thing about Jed's condition, and then you decided that you were going to change that medication, correct? And she's like, yeah, absolutely. And he's like, and you wrote that prescription for your husband? And she's like, yeah, I did. And he's like, and where did you get that prescription filled? And she was like, at a women's clinic. And he was like, and when you were on the road, where was that medication being sent? And she was like, oh, to lots of different places. And he was like, okay. And you were logging all of this in his medical record? And she's like, no. And he's like, okay, all of these things are against the oath you basically took when you became a doctor. So this isn't necessarily now about the fact that you lied on Zoe's medical history form. This is about the fact that you as a doctor have broken your code of conduct. This is like a systematic cover-up of someone's illness. And the fact that you haven't kept medical records makes it seem like you're hiding something. So at the end of the day, Abbey Bartlet, the likelihood is you're going to lose your license.
Horrifying. And basically, the take home is she needs independent counsel and she shouldn't appear on Dateline with Jed.
And she's like, I want to sit with my husband when this happens. And Oliver's like, I don't think you should be anywhere without a lawyer. I can't deal with any more of this. Like, it's all so horrible. So I'm just going to go to low-lit Josh's office.
Yeah.
Now, low-lit Josh's office always feels like a dangerous place for Donna to be.
The question on all our minds is Donna going to let Josh know that she knows?
And she does.
Because it's written all over her face.
It's written all over her face. And she's like, are you okay? How's your day been? And he's like trying to classically kind of like, you know, throw it off. And then she looks at him dead in the eyes and just says, Sagittarius. And the eye contact after she says that is giving the way that Josh looked at her when he said, you said it was a late thaw.
Yeah.
Like it's saying I love you.
It's saying I love you. And also for me, this is the moment where I'm like, neither of you can end up with anybody else. There is too much shared lore at this point. No one else is going to understand what you two have been through together.
Too much ground has been covered, you know?
Yeah.
Between the two of you. Like, no woman is going to know him as well as Donna does.
No.
That's incredibly toxic, but I'm kind of here for it. We get the news that CJ is putting the lid on. There is a full lid going on.
I'm still incredibly stressed that like somehow the news is going to leak before tomorrow night when they do Dateline. The
other thing is that like after Donna like whispers Sagittarius to him, Josh immediately goes to see Toby and is like, Donna knows, you told her. And Toby was like, I kind of was thinking that you would have told her by now. Which also speaks volumes.
Yeah, and I feel like Josh's concern is he doesn't want Donna exposed to having to testify before a grand jury. He doesn't want her to be implicated if there is a fraud investigation.
Yeah.
He wanted to protect her.
I didn't think about it like that. I kind of thought that it was like a pastoral thing, that he wanted to know how she took it. I didn't even think about the fact that like he's like, you should have talked to me before you brought her in on this, because like she's going to have to like sit in a courtroom now.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I just got full body shivers. He does love her.
Yeah.
The final group scene in this episode is mental.
So good.
Like, everyone is just striding into rooms very stressed. Like, we're in Leo's office and like one by one, we're all arriving and we're all saying the same thing. Leo describes what is happening as extracurricular nonsense, which I think is an insane phrase to discuss the actions of this episode.
Didn't Abby refer to it as nonsense in last episode as well?
Yeah, someone's loving the word nonsense in the writer's room.
I also love CJ walking in and she's saying exactly what all of the men are saying, but she also says, I hate to sound shrill. Dear God, being a woman.
I did think of you when she said that.
He tells them they're having the meeting with Jed and he says, let's break and you guys all get some food and then we'll come back and have the meeting with Jed. I feel sick. I don't think any of them are eating.
No, none of them are eating or sleeping until at least a few days' time. So,
we're here.
So Josh and Leo have like a little moment, like after everyone's left, where they're coming back to the big tobacco storyline, which makes me think it's going to carry on into the finale episode. Where basically it's kind of like a go get 'em tiger moment where you can see these two men feeling powerless in the situation they're in with Jed. So they're putting all of their energy into something they feel they can change. So we get quite G'd up and like Josh is like, attaboy, go out and get him. And then Leo strides into the like office that Charlie shares with Mrs. Landingham. And Charlie's like on the phone, but he's just kind of like holding the receiver.
I was immediately like, what's up, Charlie? We don't see Charlie be that still. He's normally a busy, busy boy. Why is he standing so still?
And this was when my world fell apart.
Yeah.
Because what Charlie says to Leo is, Mrs. Landingham was driving her car back from picking it up. And she was at the junction of 18th and Potomac. And she was hit by a drunk driver who was running a red light. And like she was hit at speed. And Leo says, is she okay? And Charlie just says, no, she died.
And I think what killed me even more was the fact that the news came from Charlie, who has already had this call once in his life. He's already gotten the call to say that his mother is dead.
Yeah. And like this person who's become like a mother figure to him.
Yeah.
And so I really like wanted to stay with Charlie.
But we have to go and tell Jed.
And Leo just says, is he alone? And then I was like, I don't know if I can watch Leo tell Jed that Mrs. Landingham died.
And Leo's face, he like looks through the window of the Oval Office at Jed on the phone, like on other business. And Leo's face through the window looking at Jed is just like pure love. And he just like doesn't want to do this to him.
It's the fact that he's like, I know everything that he's trying to handle at the moment. And like the news that I have for him is basically like the worst news that I'm ever going to tell him. And it's, like, I think Leo's so used to giving Jed bad news, being like, hey, this is this new thing we have to handle. But it's just like the fact that he's like, I never expected to have to come to you with this.
And if I was, it was going to be, like Mrs. Landingham died peacefully in her sleep last night. Yeah. It wasn't supposed to be like this.
And the choice that they make is so well earned, I think, which is that Leo just walks into the Oval Office and the door closes behind, and the shot is just the shot through the glass door.
Yeah.
Like you're looking at Leo's back and then you're looking at Jed's face, but you don't see as much detail because it's kind of like almost like puckered glass. And I don't understand why it had to happen.
I mean, I do kind of, for Mrs. Landingham, I'm like, A, she won't have known much about it.
Yeah.
And B, part of me is like, maybe she didn't deserve to like live through what's coming.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, is it really fucking horrible of me to be like, you know, at least she died not knowing that, like, Jed had kept this secret from her, and like he didn't part of me was like, I think the idea that he'd been so sick and had like been carrying this diagnosis and hadn't told her would have been really hurtful to her.
And also, I think she, having like lost her 2 sons, I think watching, I'm glad that she never had to like watch Jed deteriorate.
I just feel like it felt so cruel for a character that's been through so much to like see her have so much joy in this whole episode, and then just like at the end she's dead. Like, I really needed a moment for us to celebrate something, because this whole fucking end of this season has been so heavy. And I just wanted to see Mrs. Landingham in her new car. I'm sorry.
I'm not going to lie to you, dear listener. I didn't make any note of any of the quick fires this episode because I was in too dark of a place.
Okay,
I didn't note any of them down.
But honestly, Leigh, where do we go emotionally from here? Like, how do we rally as a team? Because I can't rally right now. I would just like to, before we finish this episode recap, come back to earlier, Leigh, when you were like, why did they choose Sagittarius as the password for the room? So the bit of trivia around that is amazing, which is that particular password was chosen because it's the star sign of Catherine Jewston, who plays Mrs. Landingham. So every time any of those actors were saying that password, they would have known it's because it's her last episode.
Why would you tell me that while we're recording?
And that's all I've got, Leigh. Let's move on to the quick fires.
Motion to just, I think in honor of Mrs. Landingham, I think motion to just like not quick fire this episode.
There are a few that I would like to do.
Okay.
Because I think it's important.
Okay.
So, and I'm going to do this in kind of an in memoriam style.
Okay. Take it away, Fi.
Best fashion for me. Let's be honest, Leigh. Every time an episode has had Mrs. Landingham in it, Mrs. Landingham has made the list of best fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I would like to note from this particular episode is that Mrs. Landingham said that the new car she'd bought was blue. And she had chosen on that day to wear her blue skirt suit to drive home in her new blue car.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sort of woman that she is.
Mm-hmm.
We shall move on. I'm not interested in any of the sort of like other frivolous ones, but let's get to best writerly moment.
Mm-hmm.
Any of the scenes that we have ever seen between Charlie and Mrs. Landingham have always been amazing writerly moments.
Mm-hmm.
And let's go back once again to probably one of the best writerly moments in this entire show, which is the monologue, the Christmas monologue that Mrs. Landingham gives about her boys.
Mm-hmm.
I just miss my boys.
Mm-hmm.
I will, just for the record, say that Man, I Feel Like a Man is obviously going to be the insane guy saying comeback's going to dance with the girl that brung him.
Mm-hmm.
Just because that for me is just an unbelievable piece of craziness. Girl, I Feel Like a Girl, I think just has to be Mrs. Landingham saying that she wanted to buy her car outright.
Yeah.
For herself. And Leigh, the thing that made me proudest to be an American this episode was Mrs. Landingham talking about the car that she bought and saying, she's a beauty.
It's a beauty. Jesus Christ.
In fact, everything Mrs. Landingham has done in this show has made me proud to be an American.
Agreed. Because she lost 2 sons in Vietnam and she's not missed a day of work in 20 years. I'm going to move on to the study session.
Can I just have like a minute? Please may
I can't linger in it, Fi. I can't.
May I just get myself a glass of water? I really wasn't expecting to cry so openly on a podcast. That wasn't what I had planned for my morning.
Dear listener, I cannot express. There's only one time that me and Fi have cried this much at something, and it's when we watched the film A Dog's Purpose.
Which I think we have referenced before when we've cried in these episodes. Okay. Let's go. Let's do it.
Okay, fabulous. I'm returning to one of our listener requests from a couple of weeks ago when I elicited study session requests. This is from Queer Pointy Ears, who is one of our patrons on Patreon, who requested the study session, Who Even Is Edith Wilson? We're going to have a moment of kind of compare and contrast, a moment of sisterhood for Abbey Bartlet with one of her predecessors as First Lady. Now, I am borrowing quite a lot for this study session from the author of Untold Power, The Fascinating Rise and Complex Legacy of First Lady Edith Wilson by Rebecca Boggs Roberts. And I have taken her as kind of my main source for this because she's kind of been the main source of scholarship on Edith Wilson's life in kind of the last 10 years. And a quote from Rebecca. Beautiful, brilliant, charismatic, catty and calculating, Edith Bowling Galt Wilson was a complicated figure whose personal quest for influence reshaped the position of First Lady into one of political prominence forever. And still nobody understands who she was. She climbed her way out of Appalachian poverty and into the highest echelons of American power, and in 1919 effectively acted as the first woman president of the US. Before women could even vote nationwide, when her husband, Woodrow Wilson, was incapacitated.
She is just a stone cold ledge, right?
She's a stone cold ledge. There are some complicating factors, which we'll get into.
Let's just say the era that she exists in means that she's not going to be like uncomplicated.
No. So the first immediate complicating factor is a lot of people are like, well, what made Woodrow Wilson, as we discussed in our What Even Is the ERA episode, what made Woodrow Wilson change his mind about women's suffrage? Was it because his wife asked him to? No. Edith was firmly anti-suffrage.
There it is. Edith. Come on, girlie.
A lot of her political views were shaped by being kind of like a Southern woman of her time.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. There's going to be some...
She was also an active member of the Confederate Memorial Literary Society.
No.
Which worked to erect Confederate memorials. Which obviously, is tough. That's super tough.
Edith.
But with that caveat...
with that huge caveat.
In 1919, Woodrow Wilson had a stroke, famously, and was incapacitated. And as Rebecca says, she stepped in and really held the reins of executive power to the degree that anybody was holding the reins of executive power at that moment, and lied about it. Interesting.
So do we feel like this is a case of, no, Woodrow's told me he wants to do this?
Precisely. So, as Rebecca puts it, I think very profoundly, and I am going to quote her again, I'm kind of in love with this woman. I would highly recommend, I'm going to get her book after this, because I was listening to a load of talks that she gave around the time of her book's release, but I really want to read the full book because it sounds fascinating. But her basic pitch about what her scholarship is adding to the kind of biography of Edith Wilson is, if you take just that one slice of her life, you don't understand her at all. You don't understand anybody from one slice of anybody's life. And so the existing biographies tend to reduce her to one of three stock characters. Either she was a naive rube who was a country mouse taken advantage of by Machiavellian political men, super not true. Or maybe she was Lady Macbeth with Machiavellian tendencies of her own and was seizing control of her own agenda. Little bit true, but not entirely the story. Or maybe she was just the best Mrs. Woodrow Wilson you can imagine, and that everything she did was to support him. And perhaps she was naive, and perhaps she put her husband before her country, but her heart was in the right place, and it wasn't that big a deal. Also, not the whole story. The tricky part about telling the whole story is that third stock character, the perfect wifey. Edith was the biggest proponent of that myth. She spent a lot of time trying to convince people that that's who she was and that's all she did. She also, Rebecca refers to Edith's own memoir. She was the first lady to write a memoir, was Edith. And Rebecca refers to it as, it's totally worth reading. It's delightful. It's funny. It's frank. It's also in places demonstrably untrue. Now,
yeah.
If we get into her biography a little bit, prior to 1915, she's the only source on her life story. So therefore, it's murky. We can't be sure of what's true and what's not true. But what we do know is she was from Virginia. She's still to this day the only Appalachian First Lady. And her family were historically tobacco planters and slave owners in the South. And they were one of the first families of Virginia, meaning they were direct descendants of the first European settlers to arrive in Powhatan land, which English settlers named Virginia. Mm-hmm. She also claimed to be a direct descendant of the daughter of the Powhatan chief, Pocahontas, who famously married one of the Jamestown colonists. A portrait of Pocahontas hung in her DC home, and she had a vast collection of Pocahontas-related objects. And that part of her story does seem to be true.
Oh.
Now, obviously, the family kind of lost everything through the Civil War, but really clung to their social status. Edith was very much raised with myths of the time of her family before the Yankees took everything away. Mm-hmm. She was either number 6 of 9 kids or possibly 7 of 11 kids. It's unclear.
It's a lot of children either way.
I think some people are counting the ones that didn't live and some people aren't. You know, that kind of vibe. Okay. And she was raised above a shop with like aunts, lodgers, grandparents, all living there. It had been her dad's like investment property before the Civil War. Mm-hmm. And then he had to move his whole family into it after they like lost the plantation. Yeah. Her paternal grandmother Bowling, by all accounts, was terrifying. She insisted on continuing to wear Civil War era hoop skirts for her entire life, and also wore like a kind of mourning brooch of human hair and kind of held court in her rocking chair. And she singled out Edith amongst her grandkids of like, you're the one. You're the one who's smart.
Okay.
You're the one who's brave.
No pressure.
You're going to make it out of here, you know. Her other grandmother and her mother, however, were very much like part of the Victorian cult of womanhood, being like, you need to be demure and submissive and like not make waves. So through her life, she kind of is balancing these two aspects of herself, and that I think she was quite a bolshy woman, but she also had this influence of like, I need to be bolshy, but also pretend that I'm not.
Yeah.
She had limited schooling. She was mostly schooled from home. And then at 18, she was sent to live with a sister in DC to help her take care of a baby. And she arrives in Washington's like Gilded Age and is like, I'm going to master the streetcar system and go to the theater and go see live music. And she's like, it's a welcome to New York moment. She's like, This is where I need to be.
Yeah, it's been waiting for you.
And in order to stay in DC, she doesn't want to go back to Appalachia. So in order to stay in DC, she marries like the cousin of her sister Gertrude's husband. He's a lot older than her. He's very nice to her family, though, and like gives all her younger brothers jobs. He and his dad and his brother own like the high-end jewelers in
good
DC.
Catch. Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson apparently bought a coffee service from them.
Wow.
Yeah. But he's kind of, bless him, you know, Norman is kind of boring vibes. In her memoir, he only gets a page and a half for them being married for 12 years.
That's really tough for Norman.
But, you know, she gets to have a really great social standing being married to him. They go on vacation abroad every year, you know, which in like 1908 is a big deal.
Yeah.
They did have one baby who only survived for 3 days, and the baby is not talked about in her memoir. But she does talk about like this kind of like mounting set of losses that she has over the course of a couple of years. Her dad died, then Norman's dad died, then Norman died, and his brother by this point, who co-owned the business, was the term that was used was invalided. I'm not quite sure what was going on, but he, for whatever reason, was not able to run the business. So suddenly she is a rich widow and business owner.
Shit. Were women allowed to run businesses then?
I think if there's no one else to inherit, yeah. I mean, women didn't have the vote at this point.
Yeah. But I guess it's her husband's business and like she's widowed, so she's running his business. So it's technically not her business. She's just in charge of it because he's deceased. Yeah.
So she was super smart. She hired like a business manager to run the business for her. That business manager was really great. She's making shit tons of cash, and she's like going on holiday to Europe every year. She becomes the first woman in DC to get a driver's license, and she has like a cute little electric car. That was like, they were marketed to women at the time because they weren't like dirty, because they didn't have like icky gasoline and stuff. And they had
Sorry, I just find that's so funny.
They had a top speed of 13 miles an hour. It was basically like a glorified scooter, but
yeah, she
was kind of known for like driving this little like early electric car around town. She was also 5'9" and broad-shouldered, so a representative of the tall woman community fee.
Thank you. Yes, I love to hear it.
Now, Woodrow Wilson has come into the White House. His wife has been absolutely torn apart by the gossip mags because she's super smart, but she's shy. She doesn't like the hostess role. So that's mostly done by his daughters, who we've discussed before.
Yes.
But they all kind of slowly start getting married off. And Woodrow's wife dies, Ellen dies. And so World War I breaks out, and Woodrow Wilson is like lonely and stressed out and depressed in the White House. He doesn't do well with being single.
No, and that's fine. You know, it's just good to know that about oneself if that's the truth.
Yeah. And his doctor, Carrie Grayson, is worried about him because he's never been in the best of health. And now he's like rattling around the White House and like not exercising and not eating properly.
Yeah. And so his doctor's like, bruh, you need to get a wife.
And he's
now.
like overworking himself. Now, Carrie Grayson's girlfriend is one of Edith's best friends.
A matchmaker moment.
So he's basically like, he says to Edith, you need to befriend people in the White House because they're all super sad right now. She befriends Helen Bones, who's a cousin of Woodrow's and was his wife's personal secretary. And she's kind of been trying to handle the like social first lady calendar stuff since Ellen died. So they become friends. They go for a walk one day. Helen invites Edith back to tea after their walk, and Edith comes up in the elevator. The elevator doors open. It's like an Elizabeth Bennet moment. She comes out in her like with her muddy boots. The elevator doors open. Woodrow Wilson sees her, and he's gone from moment one. He's like, who is this woman? I'm obsessed with her. He is immediately smitten. He's still to this day the only president with a PhD. He's like a super intellectual, but he is immediately writing her like gushing, racy love letters.
We love that with like a later in life romance. You know?
Fully, yeah. But she just like keeps turning the conversation back to politics as he's writing to her. She's like, oh, but we were having that really interesting conversation last night about like this particular government official stepping down. Maybe I should replace them. Woodrow Wilson proposes to her 5 weeks after meeting her. She says no. He keeps proposing. She keeps turning him down. She has claimed for forever that she wasn't political. This is absolute garbage. She was very like intellectually curious. She was fascinated by his job, as anyone would be. He, in order to woo her, starts sending her, along with these like gushing love letters, like packets of pending legislation.
Don't do that, Woodrow. Don't do that.
And like daily updates on policy issues. And he's waiting to hear back from her with her notes and commentary. And his advisors are like, what are you doing? So he's also at one point sends her his cipher so that she can like decode diplomatic correspondence.
This guy is gone.
All in an effort to like woo her. There had been rumors that he'd had an affair on Ellen before with a bohemian woman in Bermuda named Mary Peck.
I don't like that description.
And that was potentially going to be an issue in the previous election. The letters were given to the Roosevelt campaign, but Roosevelt chose not to release them in the end because he didn't think the public would believe it because, quote, you can't cast a man as Romeo who looks like the apothecary's clerk.
So savage from Roosevelt. That's funny.
This is the same man that got shot and gave a speech anyway. So he's a crazy man. But yeah, so his advisors are so stressed out by how obsessed he is with Edith that they lie to Wilson and start saying that Mary Peck is threatening to make the letters public unless he breaks up with Edith.
I love this. This is so like high school. It's amazing.
Because all of his advisors were worried that the public would like hate him if they thought he'd moved on too quickly after Ellen dying. Because this is all happening within happening within like a year of her dying. Also, although we didn't have national women's suffrage, the Western states had women's suffrage at this point, and they knew that in the next election they would need the woman's vote in the Western states to put him over the edge. Now, as it happens, she told him she didn't want to be first lady. She told him that she would marry him if he lost in 1916. He didn't hear this. He just heard like, oh, you said yes to marrying me. He just starts telling everyone that they're engaged. And whatever happens, they'd go ahead and get married. And even though he does win the next election, she becomes first lady. Now, obviously, the first lady is supposed to be like the ideal of American womanhood. The period that Edith Wilson was first lady for is the kind of the time when, between 1915 and 1920, the ideal of American womanhood was changing basically daily.
Yeah.
But you know what? She had gorgeous manners. She kind of smoothed the way for Woodrow Wilson because he was quite an awkward man, but she was like, just knew how to chat. She knew how, she had those like Southern graces, she knew how to play it. And so actually it was California women that put Woodrow Wilson over the top in that election.
Okay.
Edith is now suddenly his confidant, also kind of his personal assistant. It's also been, people have been like, she was immediately trying to oust the members of his staff who were trying to get him to break up with her. It's a whole thing.
I could believe that. I could believe that from her.
Yeah. She also is like an amazing first lady through World War I. She was seen to be like wearing thrifted clothing. She was like a big advocate for rationing. She was like doing meatless Mondays in the White House. She stopped paying the White House gardeners so that they could, work for the war effort. And she just borrowed 20 sheep from a local farmer to graze the White House lawn. And then she like auctioned their wool. So people were obsessed with her, basically. They were like, this woman is amazing. Then Woodrow Wilson decides that he wants to go and negotiate the end of World War I treaty, what became the Treaty of Versailles, himself. Prior to that, no US president had left the country for like more than a day, and no sitting first lady had ever left the country.
That really shocks me.
Yeah. So but in order to go and do this, they had to be like out of the country for like 6 months.
Yeah, because you got to get a boat. Treaty. You got to get a big old boat.
Yeah. Now, Paris, super grueling. Wilson is just getting sicker and grouchier by the day because he's trying to like get this League of Nations set up, which is his like big dream. Now, obviously, famously, we have the influenza epidemic also going on. Yeah. He gets the flu while he's there. It's also just like a super grueling work schedule. Meanwhile, Edith is schmoozing. She's like mixing with the Queen of England. She's visiting injured soldiers in hospitals throughout France. She's vibing. She's loving life. Now, famed physician Silas Mitchell ominously predicted that Wilson would never even make it through his first term. That was obviously not true, but his doctors were really worried about his tendency to overwork. And while he was so stressed negotiating with these European leaders, he basically eliminated all exercise and relaxation time from his diary. But also, Edith is like making sure that she's involved. So in February 1919, when Wilson presented his plan for the League of Nations to the peace conference, Edith basically finagled her way into attending that session by kind of charming the French prime minister. There was no need for her to be there, but she was like, I'm part of this. Now, the Senate wanted changes to the League of Nations in the Treaty of Versailles when Wilson finally brought it back to the States. And Wilson was like, no, I've spent 6 months negotiating this. I'm not going back to them with changes. So he decides, as a sick, exhausted man, that what he needs to do is go on a national train tour across the states to sell the Treaty of Versailles to the American people in 100-degree heat in August in a rail car.
Yeah, I imagine this doesn't go well.
Both Carrie Grayson and Edith are like, this may kill you. And Woodrow Wilson is like, but then I would die a martyr to the most important cause of my life. And they were
He's
like,
relentless,
okay.
isn't it? He's a relentless dude.
Both with women and peace treaties.
Yes.
During this time, he's overworking himself so much that he loses his appetite. His asthma gets worse. He starts suffering from like these debilitating headaches that make him lose his vision. Meanwhile, he's traveling through the Midwest all the way out to Spokane, Washington. Hello, Washington. Down to San Diego. And then finally, he's heading back east. And in Colorado, after a speaking engagement, Edith discovers him collapsed. His facial muscles are twitching uncontrollably. He's experiencing severe nausea. He's collapsed, basically. And the rest of the train tour is cancelled. His private secretary announced that the rest of it was cancelled because the president was suffering from a nervous reaction in his digestive organs.
Oh, yes. I might start using that. Needing a mental health day. I'm like, I've got a nervous reaction in my digestive organs.
They speed back to Washington, and a week after getting back to the White House, he suffers a massive stroke.
Okay, so that wasn't the stroke.
Mm-hmm. They think, in retrospect now, they think that might have been a mini stroke.
Yeah.
And basically, this stroke left him paralyzed down his left side. His speech was slurred. He had a couple of secondary infections. It was like touch and go for a week about whether he'd live.
Whoa.
Now, in Edith's memoir, the way that she frames it is, the doctors said to her, so the men said to her, if he does everything he's elected to do, he'll die. But if he quits, he'll die because he's living to see his dream of the League of Nations realized. And if he resigns, you take away his motivation for getting better. So if he serves as president, he dies. If he resigns, he dies. And if he dies, there will be no world peace.
So no pressure on her or on him, just like, get well soon.
But I also love Edith being like, it wasn't my idea for me to take over. It was just what the men told me to do.
It was what was best for my husband, was for me to take power. Now,
the 25th Amendment didn't exist yet. So the kind of step up for the vice president to take over was murky. And also the VP at the time, unfortunately, was a bit of a joke. He was only added to the ticket solely because he was from Indiana and they needed Indiana's electoral votes.
Great.
So Edith, Carrie Grayson, the doctor who set her up with Wilson originally, and John Tumulty, who was Wilson's private secretary, close ranks. And they decide not to tell anyone how sick the president is. In fact, they are not even going to tell the president how sick he is.
Okay.
So they tell the press it's nervous exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
They lied to Congress, the vice president, the press, and the public. Edith Wilson described herself as a steward during this time. And she wrote in her memoirs that she, quote, never made a single decision regarding the disposition of public affairs, but only claimed powers over what was important and what was not, and when to present matters to her husband. Basically, the system being, if you need something, come to me. If it needs an answer, I'll take it to the president, but then an answer would come back in her handwriting. So he has this episode in October. He does not have any contact with anyone outside his immediate circle until January of 1920.
Whoa. And
he is not seen in public again until April of 1920.
Yeah, see, that just couldn't happen. And
it only happened then because the press were saying, if he's okay, we need to see him. They had to put him in like a cape style coat because he couldn't put his arms through sleeves because he was paralyzed down one side of his body. They basically like wedged him into a car and drove him around DC to show the public that he was alive.
Yeah, that doesn't feel great, does it?
Also, there was finally like a meet and greet with men demanding answers, which included the Secretary of State and a couple of senators who were insisting on a face-to-face. They came under the false pretenses of discussing an international kidnapping, but they were actually trying to find evidence of the president's unfitness for office. But Edith, together with his doctors and select aides, basically put on a show what the Guardian called a circus of doctors, and also Wilson following Edith's cues to basically give the impression that he was fine.
That's kind of unnerving, I think, at this point. It's kind of creepy at this point.
He didn't meet with his cabinet again until April 1920.
And by that point, he's kind of recovered enough to be able to do his job.
He never fully recovered.
But he's kind of public facing again by that point?
I mean, he's still paralyzed down one side of his body. He's just like masking it somehow. Oh, and ultimately, Edith, the whole time, is still deciding which issues are presented to him. And therefore, she's actually, whether she means to or not, she's making political decisions.
Oh, yeah.
Because the treatment for stroke at the time was like, you can't be stressed out and you can't make any difficult decisions, which is ultimately the job of being president.
Yeah.
So they were only ever telling him good news in order to not stress him out, in order to get him better.
And all the bad news, she was just like, I'll handle this.
Mm-hmm. Wilson was planning on running for a third term. People were like, no, you're crazy. But because he was only being told good news, he was shocked when he lost Warren Harding in 1920. But by the end of his lame duck period, Edith is basically looking for a house for him to convalesce. Like, they need a house with access. Like, they need an elevator and doors wide enough for a wheelchair. Ultimately, Edith outlived him by 37 years. He died 4 years after leaving office. He never fully came back to who he was before his stroke.
Yeah.
And she basically single-handedly created the myth of the Wilson presidency. And she wrote her memoir partly in a rage because everyone in the Wilson administration, like down to the housekeeper, basically wrote a memoir. And she felt she felt like they were all doing him wrong. And so she put this memoir out to basically sell this huge myth of her husband as like this hero of the League of Nations. But she lived for ages. She lived to ride in JFK's inaugural parade. She was a huge backer of JFK's campaign. She also invited every subsequent first lady, regardless of political party, to tea before they took office.
A terrifying idea.
She continued to own all of the literary rights to all of his personal papers. She denied any access to anyone who she felt would damage his reputation. And she maintained control over the script for the 1944 biopic Wilson. And she bequested her home in her will to the National Trust, stipulating that their mansion, where she lived alone for the next 37 years, stand as a memorial to him.
You just wouldn't disagree with this woman. I'd also be terrified to receive notes on a script from her.
But I thought it was only right in this a kind of memorial episode for our dear departed Mrs. Landingham to cover the story of another absolute weapon.
Yes, truly. Yeah.
Someone who kind of, whether it was inadvertent or not, was the acting president of the United States.
She was in many ways the first female president.
Yeah.
Wow. Honestly, I feel like what we keep coming across in these study sessions, Leigh, is like films have been made about a lot of the scenarios that you've like talked me through of American history, but not from the perspective that I would find interesting.
Yeah.
Like, where is the film that's following this woman?
Yeah.
Like this, why is Cate Blanchett not played this role?
I mean, just also the concept of her being like a young, hot widow, just about DC.
Yeah.
In her like late 30s, early 40s.
Just being like, I'm going to get my own car. I'm going to go on holiday to Europe. Get a grip. Amazing. I feel like I don't want to, but we must come back and record the actual finale.
We have one episode left of season 2.
I don't know I don't want to watch it because it's going to be really sad and scary.
But so many people have told me, I believe it's called Two Cathedrals. So many people have told me it's their favorite episode.
Okay, fine. All right, we'll do it.
Okay, please. I'm speechless, floored. I don't. We're Queer Gals Watch The West Wing. We're at Queer Gals Watch on all the socials. We're Queer Gals Watch on Patreon as well. If you, honestly, the Patreon this week has been blowing up.
It's been popping off.
Join the party. We've also added a new feature where we add little voice notes of our immediate gut reactions to the episodes, which are really fun. And people seem to be enjoying as a little Patreon benefit. But yeah, just get in touch and we'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week for the finale.
Love you guys. Thank you for all your emotional support through this week.
And Leigh, here's to Mrs. L.
Here's to Dolores, a classy bitch.
R.I.P. baby.